Avatar: The Last Airbender, Book 1, Episode 11, The Great Divide, is widely considered by the fanbase to be the worst episode of the show, with many arguing that it's best to just skip the episode altogether. I mean, even the creators knew it sucked. They lampshaded it in the recap episode.
Look, it's the Great Divide, the biggest canyon in the Earth Kingdom.
Let's keep flying.
Now, no one is saying this episode is great, and I won't be in this video, but the fact that this whole you can just skip the Great Divide altogether idea has been just passively floating around the Avatar community for years and years is absolutely unacceptable to me. First of all, I think The Great Divide helps the pacing of Book 1 overall. Immediately preceding it is Imprisoned, The Winter Solstice, Parts 1 and 2, The Waterbending Scroll, and Jet. A pretty heavy batch of episodes overall, so I think giving the audience some lighter, less serious adventuring was appropriate before launching into The Storm. The Great Divide also gives us some of the first discussions we hear about Earth spirits, reinforcing the lore of this world. It reinforces the requirement of physical movement in bending when the canyon guide becomes unable to earthbend after breaking his arms, and it's the first time we see refugees of the Earth Kingdom traveling to Ba Sing Se for protection from the Fire Nation, planting the seeds of how important the capital city is in this war an entire season before we'll go there ourselves. But most importantly, The Great Divide is absolutely worth your time because of the Ganjin and Zhang flashback sequences. While the rivaling tribes each explain their shared history to Sokka and Katara respectively, the show switches to a completely different art style for each side of the story. The first of the two is the Ganjin tribe, whose perspective is represented in an art style that takes influence from Vampire Hunter D, an anime film from 1985 adapted from the novel series of the same name, which would later get a sequel film in 2000 called Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. Its art style is very crisp, moody, and sharp, which is appropriate for the refined, polished nature of the Ganjin. On the other hand, the Zhang's telling of their past is extremely geometric, proportionally warped, and high contrast. This art style was done as an even more direct homage to the anime film Dead Leaves, a 2004 production IG movie which is the brainchild of Hiroyuki Imaishi. These scenes are some of the most overt examples in the entire Avatar series of the crew wearing their love for anime on their sleeve.
There was some Vampire Hunter D inspiration. There was some Dead Leaves inspiration in there.
Up there with Aang dressing up as Goku from Dragon Ball Z and Vash from Trigun. Certainly the most overt example at this point in the show. Everyone knows Avatar was influenced by anime, but I think that despite the series being nearly 2 decades old and still relevant and beloved, only a very small portion of its extremely passionate fan community understands or is even interested in understanding how much anime is infused into the very DNA of Avatar. To people who do know, it seems obvious, but my problem is that there aren't enough of you. My problem is that on a video with 500,000 views specifically made for the purpose of talking about every relevant aspect of this episode, I have to scroll down to the dozenth comment on that video to see anyone even acknowledge the radical shift in animation style. And I have to read the response to that comment to find someone pointing out what that animation style is a direct reference to. So let's do some exploring, shall we? As I just mentioned, the more overtly referential of the two flashback sequences in The Great Divide, that of the Zhangs, was pulling from Hiroyuki Imaishi's Dead Leaves. But his influence on the Avatar crew was not nearly isolated to just this scene. Imaishi was one of the key creative forces on one of the Avatar team's favorite anime, Fooly Cooly. In fact, in a Q&A, Avatar director Giancarlo Volpe said,
Fooly Cooly was a huge one. We all were ordered to buy Fooly Cooly and watch every single episode of it.
Yeah, so you know how Aang's eyes glow white when he enters the Avatar state? That super iconic thing he only does a handful of times throughout the whole show? That was inspired by the glowing white eyes of Fooly Cooly's 12-year-old protagonist, Naota, in its final episode. All those hyper-stylized facial expressions, including the most iconic one from The Great Divide, pretty safe bet that those were at least partially inspired by Fooly Cooly. I'd even bet that the fan-favorite cut where Sokka says,
Swish, swish, swish! Yeah, bending slice! And we're on our way!
comes from this scene in episode 2 of Fooly Cooly where the shot is framed in the reflection of Kanti, a robot's CRT television head. It has the fisheye effect, very similar framing, Sokka and Haruko both animate very choppily, and Naota and Katara make almost identical faces in reaction to what Haruko and Sokka are doing. This one is also unconfirmed, but you cannot convince me that this shot from behind Aang as he stands on top of a rock while Katara narrates that she believes Aang can save the world was not directly pulled from this shot in Fooly Cooly where Mamimi looks up at Naota from behind in admiration of him before snapping a picture of the moment. It's like she's going, wow, this is iconic, I gotta get a shot of this, and the Avatar crew was like, damn Mamimi, you right as hell. Co-creators Brian Konietzko and Michael Dante DiMartino especially have explicitly pointed out that they were fans of anime studios like Gainax, which produced Fooly Cooly along with Production IG. These two studios also cooperated on The End of Evangelion, a 1997 movie following the 26-episode TV anime series Neon Genesis Evangelion. In Evangelion, the main characters fight aliens called angels with giant mecha robots called Evas, and it is confirmed that King Bumi's character design was inspired by the hunched, long-limbed bodies of the Evas. And Heibai, the forest spirit who first appears in Book 1, Episode 7, had his design inspired by the angels. More on the topic of character designs, Cowboy Bebop, which needs no introduction even to Western audiences, gave Avatar co-creator Brian Konietzko inspiration to draw his own group of futuristic, fantastical space-traveling companions, consisting of a robot Cyclops monkey with an arrow on his head holding a staff, a morose-looking balding human man in his 40s wearing a futuristic outfit, and a bipedal polar bear dog hybrid. After revisiting the sketch sometime later, he would refine it, switching around accessories and elements such that they more resembled who we now know as Aang, Appa, and potentially Momo. Bebop's main character, Spike Spiegel, also inspired the design of Jet, which just makes so much sense it hurts. Like, knowing that they were thinking of Spike when making Jet reinforces so much about everything to do with Jet's character, which I'd go into more depth about here, but it gets into some pretty spoilery territory that isn't necessary for the point of this video, so I'll just leave it there. Cowboy Bebop was directed by Shinichiro Watanabe, who also directed Samurai Champloo, another of his anime which became especially popular among Western audiences, including Brian Konietzko. By the way, one of the protagonists of Samurai Champloo, Fu, has a flying squirrel for a pet named Momo. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not. Either way, Konietzko has expressed how much he loves Watanabe, particularly his combat scenes, including the fights between Spike and this drug dealer from episode 1 of Cowboy Bebop, as well as the battle between Mugen, a main character in Samurai Champloo, and a blind woman working as an assassin named Sarah. If I had to come up with a parallel between each of these scenes in Avatar, I'd say that the way Sarah cuts through the rain with her spear when fighting Mugen feels very much like some of the waterbending moves Katara has performed in the rain. And this might be a long shot, but the way Spike dances around the drug smuggler, evading all his erratic punches and kicks, it feels kind of like Aang's Twinkle Toes style of airbending. I mean, obviously airbending is largely based on the real-life martial art of Bagua, but the way that Aang stays light on his feet in a manner that only a cartoon character could might have some of its roots here. The only other confirmed inspiration Cowboy Bebop had on Avatar that I found was that the one and only Cabbage Merchant is a recurring character in part because the Avatar crew loved Bebop's Antonio, Carlos, and Jobim, a group of 3 old men who coincidentally pop up in many of the locations that the main characters visit throughout the show. More on Watanabe, he directed Space Dandy, which is one of the greatest anime ever made, card in the corner for a video explaining why, under Studio Bones, who are responsible for this niche little show called Full Metal Alchemist. And hey, look who key animated for episode 22, it's our old pal Hideyuki Imaishi. I mean, according to Wikipedia at least, I couldn't find his name in the credits. But regardless, this episode does contain a scene that I am absolutely sure the Avatar crew watched and loved because they recreated it almost beat for beat in Book 2, Episode 11, The Desert. And the scene I'm talking about is the last one in the episode, wherein Aang finds out that Sandbenders captured and sold Appa, a revelation which sends him into the Avatar state. In episode 22 of Full Metal Alchemist, co-main character Edward Elric is being forced by central antagonists to try to create a Philosopher's Stone, essentially an amplifier of the user's alchemic abilities. And it is revealed to Ed that in order to create this Philosopher's Stone, Envy and Lust, the antagonists, are going to have him sacrifice many human lives to do so. Then, after stepping in a pool of liquid Philosopher's Stone material, Ed gets supercharged with an uncontrollable amount of alchemic energy, which only subsides when he is embraced by Maria Ross, a military soldier who cares deeply for him and his brother. Obviously, the very conceit of the main character, a young boy being overcome with power shortly after an upsetting revelation, and a female character putting themselves in harm's way to approach the main character and give them a hug which finally calms them down, is already pretty similar. But the extremely similar shot composition, editing, and effects animation, combined with the fact that these scenes both take place at the end of their respective episodes, and the fact that this would only add to the list of anime that got very popular in the West which Avatar took influence from, is enough to convince me. You know, it's funny how the Avatar team seemingly was so inspired by Imaishi's work, but they may have not even known who he was at the time, because I cannot find a single instance of anyone who worked on Avatar even saying his name. Kinda cool that he was so clearly being recognized by other animators before he went on to direct the works that he is most well known for, Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann and Kill La Kill. At this point, I've almost exclusively discussed visual similarities between Avatar and its predecessors, but I've neglected to discuss how anime inspired its structure and themes, and this information is actually pretty well known, unlike some of the more miscellaneous connections I've drawn thus far. In the early 2000s, there were very few Western cartoons that really utilized serialized storytelling. Rather, there were lots of shows that were very episodic, and this was largely the result of cartoon studios at the time believing that serialized storytelling would be economically infeasible. In fact, Giancarlo Volpe, episode director of The Great Divide, has pointed out that because The Great Divide was one of the few completely self-contained stories in Avatar, Nickelodeon aired it much more frequently than others for this very reason, possibly contributing to the negative reception of the episode via oversaturation.
It wasn't just Nickelodeon. A lot of animation studios and networks thought, oh, this continuity-based storytelling kills us in the ratings.
Yeah.
So Great Divide was their prize episode where the fact that it is fillery.
It's a standalone episode.
It's a standalone.
Unconnected.
So
yeah.
they were like, this is the episode we're going to air all the time.
Yeah.
So in some weird way, I don't mind if people are annoyed with The Great Divide because it was kind of marketing's fault.
The fact that The Great Divide stands out so much in the memories of fans who watched Avatar as it was airing or during the reruns may have also been because it was a completely episodic story surrounded by a much more serialized show. That serialization, of course, came from anime, and it was one of, if not the biggest reason Avatar was such a landmark in Western cartoons. Uncountable numbers of fans have expressed how Avatar was the first cartoon they watched which developed a world they were captivated by and wanted to learn more about. One that could have more resonant character arcs and more meaningful themes. And would you believe it, anime also had a huge effect on those arcs and themes. Once again, this is one of the more well-known influences on Avatar, but it cannot be overstated how important the work of Studio Ghibli and specifically the work of Hayao Miyazaki was to the creation of Avatar. It's been confirmed that Miyazaki's sensibilities rubbed off on Brian and Michael, and it is very clear when placing their works side by side. The anthropomorphization of nature being used to promote environmentalist philosophy, the insistence on giving antagonists understandable motivations that just happen to conflict with the protagonists rather than simply having them be pure evil, themes of anti-war, etc. And yes, plenty of visual parallels. Koizilla, aka Aang, spiritually fused with La, the ocean spirit, looks very much like the Nightwalker form of the forest spirit in Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke. Ko, the face stealer, bears resemblance in design and in name to No Face from Spirited Away. This is another long shot, but in the director's commentary for the finale of Book 2 of Avatar, Crossroads of Destiny, the cave prison that Katara and Zuko end up in had the green crystals covering its floors and walls inspired by some pictures from some anime, according to DiMartino. Knowing that he's a huge Miyazaki fan, I'd say he might have been looking at the glowing rock crystals from Castle in the Sky. They talk about how to make something look like it's glowing, a good technique is to darken everything else in the frame, and that's exactly how these crystals in Castle in the Sky are revealed, so it's possible. Back in the realm of confirmed Ghibli influences, Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro influenced the character designs of Appa and Momo. The iconic cat bus is what led to Appa having 6 legs, and Momo's facial proportions were referenced from Totoro's. My Neighbors the Yamadas, a Ghibli film directed by Isao Takahata, gave the Avatar creators inspiration for the super deformed or chibi art style that the Avatar shorts, which were included in the DVD release of Avatar, were animated in. This is also an art style which Avatar dips into occasionally throughout the series, for the first time in The Great Divide during the sequence where Aang tells his fabricated version of the Zhang and Ganjin's history. Now, you may have noticed that much of what Avatar drew from was contemporary anime at the time. I've discussed almost nothing that came out more than 10 years before Avatar, but I think that the team's appreciation for anime may have gone a lot deeper than the shows and movies that were appealing to Western sensibilities anyway. For instance, in Book 2, Episode 6, The Blind Bandit, the montage sequence of the boulder defeating multiple opposing wrestlers makes use of several postcard memories. That's the name for these single cells that are given more detailed illustrations which frequently get panned across or zoomed out from. They are frequently used as the final image of an episode of anime. Almost everyone has seen one of these at some point because they make their way into a lot of anime. And in the director's commentary for The Blind Bandit, Ethan Spalding, who directed and partially storyboarded this episode, notes that these illustrations were based off of those in old Japanese cartoons. And I think this is telling because he doesn't say anime, almost like he's referring to a time when the line between anime and cartoons wasn't so defined. And the fact that he's talking about the use of postcard memories, a technique that was popularized by the legendary but rarely discussed Osamu Dezaki in the 70s and 80s, leads me to believe that Dezaki's work was what they were pulling from here. Especially because this scene in Avatar is depicting a wrestling match, and one of Dezaki's more well-known works is Ashita no Joe and Ashita no Joe 2, which are boxing anime. Check out this awesome video by Shaves, aka Karibo-kun, breaking down the history and greatness of Osamu Dezaki. It's super informative and contains a wonderful sequence at the end containing tons of anime that also did postcard memories showcasing Dezaki's influence. I find this especially cool because it seems to be an example of Avatar not just pulling inspiration from anime, but from the same anime history that modern anime still pulls from. And on top of that reverence for the people who made modern anime what it is now, they also are willing to poke a little fun at some aspects of anime, like its prevalence of impractical battle armor.
What do you think? Pretty slick, huh? Nice.
Stuff like that, the respect for the medium's history combined with the good-spirited ragging that showcases so perfectly why people used to have conversations about whether Avatar is actually an anime or a cartoon. Avatar and anime are just so authentically cut from the same cloth. They feel like family members because they are. Luckily, I think that the increased internationalization of animation talent we've seen over the past decade, with studios from East and West both taking more and more cues from each other, has reminded audiences around the world that the terms cartoon and anime are just words we made up. Avatar is special for many reasons, but the main one to me is that it embraced a truly global perspective of what animation could be. And this is why, despite recent efforts to make a live-action adaptation of Avatar that clearly stays more true to that global mindset than past attempts, I still feel like the mere idea of doing Avatar but without animation is an ill-advised one, and almost by definition makes it impossible for the successor to achieve what the original did so well. I would so much rather watch a live-action telling of a totally unique story in the Avatar universe than a recreation of one that's very foundation was the medium it was told in. Like, that's what they did with Rise of Kyoshi, and it turned out great. How will the inspiration from Hayao Miyazaki not get lost? How will the inspiration from Shinichiro Watanabe not get lost? How will the inspiration from Hiroyuki Imaishi not get lost? How will they convey Aang riding the elephant koi fish? How will they handle drink cactus juice? How will they handle Appa and Momo fighting as samurai in Aang's sleep deprivation hallucination? By the way, Momo's samurai design was inspired by the character Miyamoto Usagi from the comic book Usagi Yojibo, whose design was inspired by Japanese swordsmen. This is the stuff I worry about with the new adaptation. How do you capture that magic that animation provides without animation? I just rewatched the trailer again, and I swear I'm not trying to be a hater, but just look at these two clips side by side, come on.
Before he's ready to save anyone.
I'm sure this show is gonna be fine. I'm sure it's gonna be fine. I just I need to stop myself. This is supposed to be about why I love Avatar. In all honesty, I really don't care what they do with the Avatar brand. I'll always have the original, and the original will always be a masterpiece, in huge part because of its influences. And Avatar was inspired by so much more than just anime. The reason I focus on anime is because out of everything Avatar pulls from, it's what I know the most about and I feel I can spread the most knowledge of. I would be very eager to learn about the other artists and mediums that influence this show, which I love so much, from people who are as into them as I am into anime. Here's a video I enjoyed by the Canapa Effect, which provides an introduction on Avatar's production history, as well as which martial arts the animation crew referenced when developing each character's fighting style. I'd also recommend picking up a copy of the Avatar art book, which is where I did much of the research for this video, and the DVD collection, which has all those director's commentaries, and the Avatar Braving the Elements podcast, which has tons of cool insight on the show from Dante Bosco, voice of Zuko, and Janet Varney, voice of Korra. By the way, Dante Bosco agrees with me about the Great Divide.
You have not 2, not 3, but 4 different art styles in this episode. You have each tribe with their specific art episode, which is so amazing. And then the first showing of the actual Avatar chibi art. In spite of everybody being a jerk in the episode, the actual art may actually make it a can't miss episode.
There is tons of publicly available information on this stuff, and all it takes to learn about it is your interest. And I'm advocating for more people to tug on that little string of curiosity when you notice something interesting or unusual in a show. Both because it's just an incredibly rewarding and enriching process to learn how the things you love are made, often in ways that deepen your love for them, but it also gives credit to the people responsible for making the thing you love, and the people who inspired them, and the people who inspired them. So go, do your own research and get back to me with all the cool stuff you find that I didn't touch on in this video. I'm sure there is plenty more I didn't mention or couldn't find the source for. For example, I have a hunch that legendary anime director, screenwriter, and animator Masaaki Yuasa may have influenced Avatar in some way, because there's more than a few cuts in Avatar that look like his style, and he animated for My Neighbors the Yamadas and an episode of Samurai Champloo, both of which we know the Avatar team saw. However, similar to Imaishi, his most known works came out after Avatar, and I couldn't find mention of him anywhere in the places I looked for researching this video, so who knows. One last thing before I go, if you're interested in more discussion of Studio Ghibli, since it was such a huge part of the Avatar inspiration, I have literally reviewed all of their films, so I'll put a link to the playlist of that video series in the description and probably on screen. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one.